and welcome to Love and COVID, a new podcast where I, your host, will be speaking with people about how their romantic relationships have been changed by and adapted to the coronavirus pandemic. As I'm sure anyone listening can attest, the pandemic has had overwhelmingly negative effects on individuals' well-being, overall levels of happiness, and generally put a damper on our visions of the future. It can be very hard in the day-to-day to continue to find motivation to get up and repeat the same cycle of Zoom meetings, trying and failing to focus on homework if you are a college student like myself, and endless household chores that never seem to be finished. As someone who was in a fairly new relationship when the pandemic began and has had to deal with the ups and downs of quarantine life, including restricted access to activities and novel social situations, I began to wonder how other couples, both new and well-established, have been dealing with these circumstances within the contexts of their relationships. Have conflicts increased, egged on by the stress and overall doom and gloom of a pandemic-stricken world? Or have people adapted to this new normal and found new ways to support each other and make even the most mundane, repetitive days feel romantic? These are the questions I will be talking with other couples about later on in this podcast. But first, I want to delve into some of the research about how couples before and now during the pandemic show their love and care for each other and work on their relationships. In her 2018 book, The Mating Game, researcher Ellen Lamont examined through interviews how heterosexual couples tend to express their care for each other along fairly strict gender lines. Men described focusing heavily on grand gestures and out-of-the-ordinary spendy gifts and experiences, while women tended to show their care in more subtle, everyday ways such as cooking and cleaning shared spaces. There were fairly strict expectations as far as who pays for dates, who confirms the exclusivity of a relationship, and even how members of a couple were supposed to express their commitment and love for each other, that fell squarely along gender lines. Oftentimes, these expectations reinforced traditional, unequal gender roles, but Lamont's participants were willing to disregard that, ignoring the larger social forces pushing them to prefer such gendered dating scripts, and reframing their expectations as personal preferences. These findings were the main reason why I was inspired to talk to young couples about their dating lives, because I did not see the same level of gender division reflected in the relationships around me, as well as in my own. I wondered if perhaps young people today have outgrown some of the gender roles imposed upon us by older generations, or perhaps we are all too tired, stressed, and financially unstable to follow the scripts before us. After learning about how gendered dating scripts affected the daters Lamont spoke to, I began to wonder how today's young couples' preferences and dating practices had been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. I know, at least for my boyfriend and I, the lack of other social options and the discontinuation of many of our usual activities and commitments meant that we were suddenly spending way more time together, but simultaneously doing a lot less. A recent study from Davis and Weigel spoke on this exact question. Their research, published in 2020, showed that as couples spend more time together, they become more interdependent and tend to exhibit more pro-relationship behaviors, such as building and showing trust, making plans together, and giving tangible reminders of their commitment to one another and the relationship. Interdependence is the phase in a relationship where you begin to think of yourself as half of a whole, as one member of your relationship couple, and begin defining yourself and thinking about your life in terms of your relationship with this other person. When taken to extremes, this may be labeled as codependence, but when interdependence is developed in a healthy relationship between two people who are willing to put in equal effort, this is a perfectly natural and logical development, especially in long-term cohabiting relationships. I wondered if interdependence had increased in other couples who had been thrust together by convenience and necessity during the lockdowns of the early pandemic and the seemingly endless quarantine that followed. Another recent study conducted during the pandemic by a group of researchers headed up by Balzarini also showed the negative side of existing so closely alongside another person. The research showed that the increased stress from COVID-caused shutdowns and stay-at-home orders can really take a toll on romantic relationships. This is not a new discovery. In fact, researchers even have a name for it: stress spillover. The only difference now is that the stress is due to COVID and the inescapable reality of quarantine, financial instability, and general anxiety about the future. And, of course, a lot of that stress is going to spill over onto the person that is closest to you, and now, again, because of the pandemic, is around you nearly 24/7. However, the same study found that people's perceptions of their partner's attentiveness to them and their needs greatly reduced the strain on the relationship as a result of COVID-19 stressors. In other words, the more people felt like their partners were truly there for them, listening and caring about their woes and worries, the better their relationships were. This all sounds pretty simple, right? Well, let's see what my participants had to say about how their relationships were affected by the pandemic. In order to do this, I talked with 3 couples, all heterosexuals who also happened to be white, in order to more effectively compare their experiences with those of the slightly older, but still mostly white, heterosexuals interviewed by Lamont. I discovered some interesting ways that these young people think about their relationships, as well as strategies they had for managing the difficulty of dating during the pandemic, that differed from the explicitly gendered preferences of the older group. Most notably, in my opinion, was the fact that all 6 of the individuals cited the love languages as the foremost way that they understood their own preferences for gestures of affection and care, as well as their partner's preferences. What are some ways that you show your care and appreciation for your partner?
Early on, we discovered each other's love languages.
Physical touch. We're big huggers.
The love languages?
Yeah.
I'm definitely physical touch and words of affirmation, and I'm pretty sure you're the same.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Sure. I'm not receiving gifts. I like compliments and hugs, so yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
The 5 love languages are a social psychological framework first described by marriage counselor Dr. Gary Chapman in his 1992 book, The 5 Love Languages: How to Express Heartfelt Commitment to Your Mate. The 5 different types are physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, and acts of service. What is important to note about the love languages is that they are not explicitly gendered, meaning that, in theory at least, anyone in a relationship can prefer any of the love languages. But I noticed some interesting gendered patterns in the preferences of my participants, with the women mostly preferring the love languages that included spending time together and talking, while the men overwhelmingly preferred physical touch. One couple, who had been dating for almost a year before the pandemic began, described how they had different love languages, but had adapted to each other's needs over the course of their relationship.
I'm a huge physical touch person. Physical touch is definitely by far my biggest love language, and I feel like outside of our relationship, Emma's not a big physical touch person, but she's adapted. I've pulled her to the dark side.
My love language is acts of service, and I definitely enjoy. I very much enjoy the idea of taking care of David. Not that he needs me to take care of him, but I do. It very much brings me happiness in our relationship.
Another couple, who began dating during the pandemic, described how they also had different love languages, but learning about each other's preferences had been an important step in the development of their relationship.
My main ones are words of affirmation, way up there, and then below that would be physical touch and quality time. But I feel like because I like to receive words of affirmation, I often give that. Even when Boomer doesn't want it, just because that's how I process feelings. But also physical touch and quality time. But if I can't have those things, then for me it's texting or calling on the phone does it pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like she was saying, it was tough at first to realize that, the things that I, how I show that I care about people is not the same as, what they need to be given in order to feel that they are cared for, which is an interesting concept. So whereas my love language is 100% physical touch, I realized that just touching her all the time did not express how much I cared about her, although in my mind that's what it was. So I sort of have learned to say words more often, which is tough. But I write haikus for her sometimes.
He's good about he'll text me long, nice, text me love letter things. Yeah.
I think this shows that, much in the same way as Lamont's participants were able to use the narrative of free choice in dating practices to justify preferring gendered and unequal practices, My participants were able to use the framework of the love languages to evoke a narrative of personal preference while ignoring the possibly gendered connotations of those preferences. In this way, perhaps young people aren't so different from their older counterparts after all, but we have just found new ways to ignore the fact that existence in this world is inherently gendered, whether we like it or not. Now turning to how the pandemic had affected these love language-loving couples. In our interviews, each of them did mention how the pandemic had forced them into spending quite a lot of time together, just as the research indicated. This couple, who had been dating for about a year and a half before the pandemic hit, talked about how this aspect of the pandemic had been a big change for them.
I think the thing that's changed the most, we spend more time together than we did beforehand.
Yeah, that's true. So we were part of the same quarantine club.
Mm-hmm.
We just hung out every day.
Mm-hmm.
It was never a problem though. We were just like,
yeah, no,
it's great.
not a change in a bad way. Just something that adapted to COVID lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, we both had just like finished doing a show together. We had all of a sudden like more free time for a little bit, and there's not much you can do during a pandemic, and so we would just like hang out all the time. Like we wouldn't like go on dates, but we would like hang out almost every day. At least like the first 2 weeks we hung out almost every single day.
And, just as we learned before, there were negatives to this increase in quality time, but luckily, the negatives did not outweigh the positives.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes spending a lot of time together can equal annoyance, like being annoyed.
Yeah. That's just how life works. And that happens more when you spend more time with someone.
Yeah.
It's just gonna happen. There's more chances to get irritated or angry.
My newest couple, the ones who had started dating during the pandemic, talked about how spending a lot of time together had caused some difficulties at the beginning of their relationship, but they had learned how to work through it together.
I think at the beginning, we had like a honeymoon stage where it was just like, again, like we hang out almost every single day, and it was so great, and we're like, wow, how can our relationship be like this good? And then, but it was still like, the beginning stages, and then we started to have like little conflicts like everybody does, and it would mostly be because we were spending so much time together, and like not that we'd get sick of each other, but like you can only like think about so many things, and like you need alone time and like to focus on other things, and there's all the stress of like school and the pandemic and homework and everything, so it's a lot to like put on your partner to like either like to always be there for you or to like always like be present when you can't always be like that. But I think like we've worked through a lot of that because we've been aware of like what is happening. And then this quarter specifically, like at the beginning we had like more of a rough patch, but then we, because of that, and like realized that and like why, and so we've been spending like less time together this quarter and more time like doing our lives, and I think it's been really healthy. So yeah.
These couples were lucky enough to have similar hobbies and interests that kept them entertained and enjoying each other's company. And they even found that all this extra time together had made them grow closer much quicker.
And I think that made us, our relationship progress a lot faster than it normally would. And I was like, oh, we've only been dating for like a month or whatever, but like we're really serious. But I'm like, no, we're not doing this like normal where you go on like a date or two a week and see each other once or twice. We see each other like every single day. And also we've known each other for a really long time. So yeah, I think it made it go faster, and we got to know each other a lot better.
Kind of like before the pandemic, we just, we were dating, and we did just like, we did normal life things together, like we just go to the grocery store or whatever. But I feel like since the pandemic has started, we've done so much more of just, we're just in each other's daily lives so often, like we just cook meals together, or we like work out together or do stuff like that. That's not necessarily a date, but we're just doing our regular like day-to-day activities together, which is nice to like see how kind of the natural flow of our day fits together. And like, I don't know, I just feel like we're good partners, like we're a good team.
Even while living in such unprecedented times and navigating the new world of nothing to do and never-ending time together, these couples attempted to retain some sense of normalcy by reimagining their pre-pandemic dating and activities into mid-pandemic versions whenever possible.
So, like, instead of going out to the movie theater, we just, like, watch movies all the time. We have movie nights a lot.
we've had like dates where we'll like make or get food and like go somewhere and eat it, or like make it like for Valentine's Day, was it? Yeah, Valentine's Day. And then like some other day at the cabin we like dressed up and like had a dinner, so it was like a date.
But most of our like date activities are like get food or make food and then like do something. Like I draw or go do something outside. Like it's most of our like actual like activities we've still been able to do, I feel like.
It seems like, on the whole, couples have been learning to adapt, figuring out what makes sense for them and the specifics of their relationship, and most of all, trying to enjoy all the time that they have together as best as they can under the circumstances. These are just the experiences of the 3 couples I interviewed, but leave a comment down below if you have experienced any of these same things in your own relationship. And even if you are not currently in a relationship, I hope you are finding the ways in your own life to best deal with and care for the people who you have found yourself stuck with for all these months. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Love and COVID.